Welcome, everyone. It's good to be back after it. You know, as always, I know everybody's going to be impressed by our 6 brave storytellers tonight, and we're also going to hear from some talented musicians. And a big thank you to all of you for attending, and for those of you that are live streaming tonight, we welcome you as well. By the way, hi, Mom. I know we're all not going to be disappointed. You know, the stories of the Hearth, our stories are really, really powerful, and we all have stories to tell. Some people say, I don't have a story to tell. No, that's not true. They shape us, they move us, and they inspire us. And the way this came about, the Hearth was started in Ashland in 2010, and Hyla and I were taught by Mark Yaconelli. And Mark Yaconelli is the one that's sneaking up in the back over there. And it's good to see Mark, and you're actually going to hear Mark. Mark, I consider the truly. Oh, okay, absolutely, yes, Leslie too. The whole opportunity, though, he's really the father of the Hearth, and we're fortunate to have Mark with us as a storyteller tonight. You know, our theme is connections, and I think for me, and I think many of you will agree, during COVID, that's something I really missed, is the opportunity to connect with each other. And now that we're all back, we're here, connections are something. I think the most important thing about connections, and some people will say in business that connections are important, but to me, the personal side is even much more important, is the opportunity for our mental health. Connections, when we talk to each other and we visit with each other, it's an opportunity for us to get to know one another and to really relate. And that's, we all have a sense of higher self-worth as well. So one of the things we do at the Hearth, and appreciate everybody's contribution for the $5 for tonight for the nonprofits, we have a featured nonprofit. And tonight, our nonprofit is the Friends of Children's Advocacy Center of Josephine County. And Christina Albrecht is going to introduce us to what this program is all about, and also some of her people that help with that. Would you like to come up here and talk a little bit about that, please?
Well, thank you all for coming out tonight, and thank you to the Hearth and to Steve and to Hyla for having the Children's Advocacy Center and the Friends of the Children's Advocacy Center as the recipients of tonight's thing. And I think about the stories, tonight's connections and stories, and there's, you know, I retired from Women's Crisis Support Team, and so a lot of you know me from there, and so there's a lot of connections there. And after a year of doing that, then Tina grabbed me and said, oh, wouldn't you like a little part-time job that's turned into a 32-hour job? But it's appropriate for me to be here just because as Women's Crisis Support Team advocate, I was on the multidisciplinary team from the Children's Advocacy Center for 20 years. And there is where we would staff cases and find out the resources and how we could help these children and their families. And so once I came on board as a staff member of the Children's Advocacy Center, I realized, wow, there's so much to be done here. And one of the things that we offer at the Children's Advocacy Center, because it's usually a one-time thing when a child comes to us, and we see over 200 children a year. But when they come to us, we want to make sure that we offer a trauma-informed and safe place for them to tell their story, just like everyone's doing tonight is telling their story. And it's telling their story of trauma and abuse. And so we want to make sure that they can do it safely. And part of that is the connection that we have as the Children's Advocacy Center to law enforcement, the judicial justice system, to bring offenders accountable and through the stories of the children. And we're the first place and hopefully the only place they have to come to tell their story. So with that, as a county agency, we have formed the Friends of Josephine County, because those of you that are on the Friends of the Library or the Friends of the Animal Shelter or whatever, we're Friends of the Children's Advocacy Center. And I'd like to introduce Susan Reel. She's the president of our children's friends of.
Thank you. You know, I would have memorized this, but I'm getting old, and so I'm just going to have to read what I have to say. But on behalf of the Friends of the Children's Advocacy Center of Josephine County, I'd like to thank the Hearth Committee for choosing our organization to be recipients of tonight's event, and thank you all for coming out to support the Hearth and our organization. Our children in Josephine County deserve a safe, welcoming environment in which to tell those stories of abuse and/or neglect. Their families deserve an environment with space to breathe, allowing them to let their guard down and receive much-needed services. Our frontline workers, the staff of the Children's Advocacy Center, DHS caseworkers, law enforcement officers, deserve an environment where their necessary work can be done in a trauma-informed, efficient manner. Sorry, I get choked up at this part. And just as importantly, the children's advocacy staff deserve a space where equipment is state-of-the-art, access to technology is readily available, and they each have a place to call their own, where they have privacy to shut their doors, decompress, gather their strength, and face another day. The Friends of the Josephine County Children's Advocacy Center was formed to spearhead the construction of the new Children's Advocacy Center. The new building will be over 4,000 square feet and will house 2 forensic interview rooms, 2 forensic medical exam rooms, family therapy, observation, and conference rooms, and 8 offices as well. We anticipate breaking ground on the new building in late February, probably early February, fingers crossed. Although we've received amazing support from Gordon Longhurst Design, the Ford Family Foundation, Cow Creek Umpqua Indian Foundation, the City of Grants Pass, and Josephine County, we're still in need of additional sponsors. We're seeking in-kind donations to help furnish the offices and meeting spaces, in addition to monetary grants to defray the rising costs of building materials. Thank you again for your support. Please be sure to sign our mailing list during the break, and we will make sure you get the first invitations to our groundbreaking. Thank you.
Thanks to both of you, and also for what you do, most important. One of the things we do with the Hearth is we start out with music. And our first music is David Pinsky and Phil Newton, and they've been a major part of the Southern Oregon blues for about 30 years, and an acoustic electric duo. Besides playing locally, they have taken their sound to Memphis and beyond, and they've kept the blues alive in the tradition of the great Delta Masters. Please help me welcome David Pinsky and Phil Newton.
We need you with us, Steve.
Maybe I could stand up. I never stand up.
My daughter's name is Bethany, so I like this place. She does too.
Look at this. Somebody needs to take a picture. There's me standing and playing. Ooh. Hardly ever happens. Well, before we start, I have to thank our other musicians for allowing us to switch the program around a little bit, because we're going to open up the next round after the intermission also. So we got a couple of tunes for you. One now and one then. And I guess I get to sing the first one. Oh, better turn the guitar on. It works. It's always good when it works. Anyway, this one's called Open the Door and Love Walked In. tasty as a jelly roll. Flaky as a biscuit, tasty as a jelly roll. Baby, jump and shout, baby, make me lose control. A little walk in, now better go. A little walk in the line, better do. A little walk in the line, better do. A little walk in the line, better do. Love walked in again. Pretty as a picture, sweet as a cherry pie. Pretty as a picture, sweet as a cherry pie. Well, I love that girl till the day I die. By the door, a love walked in, now by the door, a love walked in when I opened the door. A love walked in when I opened the door. A love walked in when I opened that door. Love walked in again. When I opened the door, a love walked in, I opened the door. A love walked in when I opened the door. Love walked in again. Knock, knock, baby. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our first storyteller is Michael Smith, and he's a storyteller at heart, one of Southern Oregon's longtime favorite musicians. He has produced countless music events for the area, including Concerts at the Park and the Storytellers Music Series at Barnstormers Theater. He's also the general manager at the Hive event venue, bringing more music and events that promote community bonding and connections. Mike's story tonight is titled Shake That Tree, a story about family connections, old and new. Please help me welcome Michael Smith.
Oh, great, I get to follow Newton and Pinsky. Oh, man. So thank you all for being here tonight. This is my third time at this event, and I'm really happy that you asked me back. I guess I was okay the first couple times. So my story tonight is about my family tree, which we like to say is a really wide, stubby shrub and not a really tall tree. And as I was thinking about this and how I would present it in the context of this conversation, I realized that the human family tree is the same thing. So think about this. I'll give you a couple stats. If you go back just 10 generations or 250 years, you'll have approximately 1,024 ancestors. If you go back 20 generations or 500 years, you would find that there's a common ancestor everyone in this room has, every single person. If you go back to the end of the first millennium, you have approximately 281 trillion connections, ancestral connections. Now, there's only been 117 billion people that have lived on the earth, so you might go, well, how does that work? I did a little more research, and it turns out that up to 80% of the marriages back in history were within second cousins. So there's a whole bunch of intertwining that went on with that DNA. So you can understand how there was that many possible connections. So with this story, I'll ask you to remember that we're all cousins, every single one of us on this planet. People who say that they might be descendants of Albert Einstein or Abraham or anybody else are right. They are. Every single one of us are. So I'll ask you to suspend your moral judgment on some of these stories. These people are mostly gone, other than the people that came out of these relationships. But I'm going to tell you a story about my family. I have one full-blooded brother. I have 3 half-brothers, and I have 2 half-sisters from 5 different relationships. And here's the really funny part about it. All of those people, for the most part, their last names are either Smith or Miller. Every one of them, all those relationships. So my parents got married in right before I was born, 1960 I was born. They had me and my brother, Mark. And then they divorced each other and went on to marry other people. They had, my dad had 2 brothers, Randy and Scott, from a different marriage, and my mom had my little sister, Nikki, from a different marriage. When I was about 8, they divorced those people and remarried each other. So, and the kicker to that story is the guy that my mom married in between there, his last name was Smith as well. So the joke in the family is she didn't have to change her driver's license when she got remarried. Either time of the 3 times she was married. So, so then fast forward a few years, and at that point, that was all the family members we knew we had. There was 5 of us. So about 15 years or so ago, my dad shows up with a picture. And it turns out that somewhere between those marriages, he had had a relationship with a lady up in Lebanon, and the lady up there had had a girl who had been adopted out in Lebanon. She grew up in that town, not knowing who her family was, and then somewhere around 30, she opened the birth records and found out that the lady in the grocery store that she went through her checking line all the time was her real mom. And one of the guys that she went to school with, she kind of had a crush on, was her real brother. Okay? So she made contact with Mom. Mom was a little reticent to tell her who her dad was and died of cancer without ever telling her father was. So she goes to the funeral up in Lebanon, and after the funeral, the thing is that they go to the Elks Lodge for a bit of a wake, a little bit of a wake. And as she's telling this story there at the Elks Lodge, one of the guys there says, my sister was best friends with your mom and would know exactly who she dated at that time. Went to the telephone, came back and said, your dad's name is Bill Smith. And he lives down in Southern Oregon. I don't know where, but I know his sister lives in Albany. So she met up with my sister, or my aunt, and when they met, they were twins. They were just virtual twins. They looked at each other, started crying, and they were twins. So we accepted Ginny into our family as a sister. We already had this convoluted, stubby shrub of a family anyway, so it really was no big deal to us, except for the fact that it was really important to her. Thus, it became important to us. She's been a great family member, and we really cherish her. So then, about 5 years ago, my brother did 23andMe Ancestry. So. Yeah, I know. You know what's coming. So in the process of that, I get a Facebook message from a lady who says, I believe that my grandfather is related to you in some way. His name is Tom Miller. I believe he's the son of your uncle, Johnny Miller. Drifting Johnny Miller was a one-man band, played 6 instruments and sang at the same time back in the 50s. Well, it turned out he had had a relationship down in New Mexico, and right before he died in a car accident, right around that time, his son, Tom Miller, was born. So I did all the math on this, and the problem was that Johnny's name wasn't Miller, it was Smith. His real last name was Smith. So as we figured all this out, it turns out that when Tom was adopted out down in, I think it was Clovis, New Mexico, the people that adopted him were named Miller. So after we got through all that confusion, and we figured it out, and I finally, I've now got a new cousin. That's cool. And then she says, this is all via Facebook message, she says, have you talked to your brother Mark lately? And I said, no. And we were getting ready to go fishing the next day. So she says, well, it turns out you may also have another half-brother. So, and she said, and I think his name's Shane Smith. So, well, great, here we go, more Smiths, you know. So I called my brother, and I said, Mark, what's going on? He says, well, I was going to wait till tomorrow to tell you when we were fishing, but yeah, as it turns out, my 23andMe identified the fact that we have a half-brother out there. So as we go through this conversation and get with Shane, it turns out that he was born over on the coast in Bandon. His mother was a waitress at a truck stop, and my dad had a relationship with her somewhere between all of those other relationships. Single event, so to speak, and Shane was born out of that single event. His dad's name was, I believe it was Pete Smith. So he was raised as a Smith, not the Smiths, but he didn't have to change his driver's license or anything when he found out who his family was either. So we make contact with Shane, and we've got a great relationship now, and he tells me stories, and we've shared those, but one of the funniest parts is that his spiritual place, his favorite place to go on the coast when he goes over there is the Humbug Rest Area, the Wayside Humbug Rest Area. Guess where he was conceived? Yeah, great story. But he also didn't know that he kind of figured that wasn't his real dad. Pete wasn't his real dad. When he confronted him about, confronted Mom about it, she said, yeah, about 9 months before you were born, I had this night with this truck driver, and he found out he was between marriages or separated or whatever, and we didn't follow through with that relationship. So at this point, we now have such a huge shrub of family members that we just have accepted them all. And everybody is my brother and sister. I really don't care where they came from. I don't. And that has changed the way I feel about everybody else on this planet. Every single person. Every color, every creed, every type of person is my brother, my sister, my cousin. Every single one of them. And that's the thing that allowed me to put this all together in this story of my family. It's all of our family. Those people are your cousins too. They're your brothers and sisters. So that's my story, and I just ask you to honor those family members as I honor all these new family members that I've got. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. Our next storyteller is Alan Cook, and Alan grew up overseas, went to Michigan State University, and has lived in Grants Pass since 1991. He has 2 daughters and 3 grandchildren. Al loves extended river trips, is a master gardener, and an avid bridge player. His story tonight is about a daughter named Worm. Please help me welcome Al Cook.
Thank you much. I too am quite honored to be here tonight. My story is a very personal story, and I recognize a few faces in here. I forget a lot of names, but age does that to us. Mike, I identify with the family stuff. As Steve mentioned, I have 2 daughters. This story is about my youngest daughter, Jenny. Her name is spelled Jennie. It's not short for anything. The family tree business about all that, to identify with that, is that she's named after my grandmother, who was a farmer's wife in Michigan, in Oneida Township. Well, when I was in the cemetery in Oneida Township about 6 years ago, there were no less than 6 Jenny, Sarah, all part of the McMullen and Cook family. So, yeah, it goes a long way. Jenny's youthful years and everything else were fairly normal for what normal kids do. And, life was just grand. But as a baby, she started to she just wiggled an awful lot. and squirmed around on the floor. And when you tried to hold her, she was hard to hold on to. She was moving around quite a bit. So very early on, I started calling her Worm. Well, when she could talk, she said, well, if you call me Worm, I'm going to call you Daddy Worm. And that has stuck, and it stuck throughout time. And so, like I said, most of her schooling in life, early life, was fairly normal. She started getting involved, though, in music and theater at a fairly young age. And then we moved to Grants Pass. And I have to tell you, moving from Salem to Grants Pass was just nothing but a blessing because of the sense of community in Grants Pass that you don't have in Salem. After we got here, she went to North Valley High School and was quite involved there. And there's, like I said, a lot of faces I recognize from the North Valley folks. But she stayed with music and became, she did everything. She wore out Dave Headgall until he didn't know what to do with her next. And then she started taking voice lessons from Joanne Pilcher, and it was now time to go off to college. She got a full academic ride to Santa Clara University down in the Bay Area. And on freshman orientation, we're walking through the different departments, and we got to the music department. And there's a nice gentleman with a bow tie on, obviously a musician, standing there in front of two concert grands that were back to back. And Jenny kind of like poked me, and she says, "Daddy, are those what I think they are?" And I said, "Yeah." I says, "Those are two real nice pianos." And the gentleman overheard me and he says, "Oh, do you play?" And Jenny said, "Well, maybe a little bit." He said, "Pick something." And so she picked out a fugue from Bach, and the two of them sat down there and gave everybody that walked through the music department a half an hour, 45-minute concert. And then he said, "Well, what is your name again?" And she said, "It's Jenny Cook." He said, "I don't see you anywhere on the list as a music major. How come?" Her answer absolutely floored me. But I'll tell you what, it got him too. She says, "I don't want to have to play for my supper." And so he said, "Well, that's too bad." He says, "As of now, you're now a music major." He says, "And I'm also going to, he says, I'm going to up your ride." He says, "I'm going to up your scholarship." And he did it right then and there. So 4 years later, she's a dual major and spent most of her time chasing her music career and music love. She also got involved in a youth group at Santa Clara, and one summer went down to Guatemala on a mission. Unfortunately, she got very sick when she was in Guatemala, but recovered and came back home, and everything went just kind of super well there. Well, here comes senior graduation time, and as a music major, she had to produce, from start to finish, a 45-minute to an hour-long music program. And because most of her training at this stage of the game was classical, I didn't understand a word of what she sang. It was Italian, French, and Spanish. I speak Spanish quite fluently, but not at that pitch. And so, to my delight, about 3/4 of the way into the program, she throws in a little lighter music. She did a few songs from the Mikado, Gilbert and Sullivan. Well, that was the very first performance I'd ever seen live as an 8-year-old boy in Maracaibo, Venezuela. And I just like, wow, talk about coming back to me. here it was in spades. And yeah, it was a great, great evening. She stayed in the Bay Area after she graduated for, I don't think it was 2 reasons. I think it was really 1 reason. Well, and it wasn't a boy. It was a pursue opera. And San Francisco had the better places, an opportunity to, and she had some friends there as well in her church group. She also went to, this is this little sidebar, she had a job working for one of the startups. And she called me one day and she says, Daddy, she says, I hate to tell you this, but I backed into the boss's Corvette. And I said, well, I think you need to go in and tell him. And she did. His basic comment and his reaction was, thank you. I don't know how I can be mad or upset with anybody that comes to work every morning and sings Blue Skies. Okay? And that's what she did. That's how, that's how she got around. That was her daily routine. So, about 9 months later, very close, 6 months after her 21st birthday, she passed suddenly. And I think that was an after effect of the Guatemala episode. At her memorial down in the Bay Area, this boss of hers came up and in a very heavy Asian voice sang Blue Skies. And let me tell you, that was just absolutely awesome. And that, as I said, as a sidebar, after she passed, within 8 hours, I see a nondescript car drive up my driveway, and out comes this shortish guy, runs up to me and said, I just heard, and I said, and what can I do for you? It was Dan Sellinger. And if any of you folks know Dan, he was not only our family doctor, but he was very involved and still is, I guess, in Grants Pass. And he offered any assistance and an outpouring of nothing but love and help with everything that we had to cope with at that stage of the game. I mean, it really is. It's a tough place to be when you deal with that situation. So we got through that. A year later, my father passed away, and he left me some money, and I decided I needed a boat because I'm an avid fisherman. So I went out and I got this beautiful jet sled and everything else. I said, what am I going to call my boat? Anybody have a guess? Worm. Okay. So the boat is now called Worm. I said, and I found somebody out off of Clover Lawn who does graphic work, and he did it in vinyl. And I said, this is what I want. And you have to imagine this. It starts with a heart up here, drops down in cursive into W-O-R-M, and at the end you dangle down and there's a hook with a worm on it. So I went back 2 weeks later to see the artwork. He says, I didn't do what you wanted me to do. I said, okay. He says, I think you're going to like this. No heart up here, starting with worm. Here's the W, no O. The O became the heart, or the heart became the O. And then he looked at me and he says, this way, your heart will always be in worm. And anytime you're out in your boat, what can I say, who's on your mind? Well, I needed something to pull the new boat, so I bought a new truck. Sorry, Steve, I'm not one for vanity plates, never have been. But if you happen to see a blue Dodge pickup driving around town still, that has the license plate WORMHK, you'll know that that stands for, obviously, if you've got a worm, you need a hook. That's worm hook, and that's my truck. And so that was 20 years ago, 19, 20 years ago now. And I'm still driving the truck. I still have the vanity plates, and I ride around all the time knowing that my ride is with Worm. So thanks so much for letting me share my story with you.
Thank you, Al. Our next storyteller is Terry Soeteber, and Terry was the juvenile court director for Josephine County for 26 years. During those years, he developed the juvenile department, the juvenile shelter and detention facility, the family court on 4th Street, and additionally, the first Children's Advocacy Center and the first CASA program in the state of Oregon was developed in Josephine County. They now exist throughout Oregon under state law. Today, Terry spends much of his time on the golf course when he is involved with nonprofit and service club activities. Please help me welcome Terry for his story, It Matters What You Say.
I know everybody in this room. My story kind of starts at a time, this is a story about your words count, they matter. And you grew up kind of knowing that, your mom tell you, be careful what you say. And I always have been, of course, as you know. Anyway, this is a story where I got rewarded for what I said. And it stuck with me the rest of my life up to this point. It happened in the early 1990s, shortly after we built the first Children's Advocacy Center. And as director of the juvenile department, Judge Neufeld gave me an additional responsibility. It was a hearings officer. They called it a referee. And what I would do every morning at 8 o'clock in the morning would be sit at a little courtroom, and I would listen to the custody requests of my staff, Children's Services Division, and probably Mr. Mecca, as to what should happen to a child who was taken into custody the night before. And a lot of times it was for burglary and some kind of assault or shoplifting. And a lot of times it was for children who were victims of abuse. Most of them at that time, because we built the first advocacy center in '89, had already been forensically interviewed. So the question was, what do we do now pending a hearing? Does the child go home? Does the child go to grandma and grandpa? Does the child go to foster care? Child go to shelter care? Where? I got to make that decision. It was a temporary decision, but an important one. This case that I'm going to tell you about is about a 13-year-old girl who was abused physically and otherwise by her uncle. And in the courtroom that morning was a social worker, her parents, mom and dad, and of course the child. And the recommendation was that she should be placed in a temporary shelter care pending further investigation. I gave the parents an opportunity to talk, and I gave everybody else a chance to talk. And in finding out, the parents were complicit. Not that they abused the child, but they knew that the father's brother had. And so sending her home at that moment was not an option. So you're kind of sitting there, and the last person to talk, or that I gave her permission to talk, was the child. And she was always looking down. Beautiful girl. And she said, I don't want to say anything. And I said, that's okay. But would you look at me for just a minute? And she raised her head. And I said, I want you to know that you matter and that you're important. And that was the end of the hearing. I had had many hearings like that, but something felt unusual about it. But I forgot, and 10 years passed. Maybe it was 11 or 12. And I retired. And I'd been retired for a couple of years. And the phone rang one Saturday afternoon. And I picked up the phone. I just came in from the backyard mowing the lawn. And I said, hello, and she said, is this Mr. Soeteber? Well, nobody called me Mr. Soeteber for about 3 years. And for some reason, I said yes. And when she said, well, my name's Mary. You probably don't remember me, but I was in your courtroom over 10 years ago. And I said, okay, what's up? And she said, well, a few years ago, a friend of mine in Grants Pass sent me the newspaper article of you retiring. And I was going to call you. And I put the newspaper article down, and it ended up in a drawer. And I was cleaning the kitchen today in the drawer, and there was that article that I forgot to call you. So I'm calling you now. And I said, about what? She said, well, I want you to know that I'm married, I have a child, I'm a college graduate, and you were the first and only person to tell me that I mattered and that I was important. And I have lived by those words up to this moment. And I wanted to call you and say thanks, because words matter.
As I listened to those words, I pulled this card on my wallet that I carry, that I give to people, and it says, you matter. I'll make sure you get one at break. You matter. Right now, I'd like to introduce Mark Yaconelli, and Mark is a published author. And the book that he has is Between the Listening and the Telling, and I did bring my copy to get it autographed tonight. So please help me welcome Mark as he talks about his book. This is not his story, but about his book.
Thanks, Steve. Good to be with all of you. Our sibling, Hearth, we're down in Ashland. You guys are here just doing this beautiful thing of touching hearts by sharing story, which is the language of human experience. I'm so excited to bring this book out into the world. It came out this last August, and the Ford Family Foundation has chosen it as a select book, which means every Oregonian can get a copy for free. You just have to go to their website, and I have that information in the back, select books, and you can get it for free. Or I'm here tonight with some of the books. I'll be selling them for cheaper than you can get at Amazon at $20, and that money goes to the Hearth if you want to purchase one here tonight. I have all that information in the back. Would love to share it with you. The book is based on stories, the work I've done with stories and community, and how stories open our hearts, just like we're feeling tonight. So thank you for letting me be here, and I'll see you a little bit later with my story.
Thank you. And before intermission, we're going to end with some music, and it's Dalton Burchette and Emily Bullock, and they're both from Grants Pass High School Chamber Orchestra. Both participate in the Youth Symphony of Southern Oregon. Dalton is the first chair of the viola section and co-principal of the Youth Symphony, And Emily is first chair of the Chamber Orchestra and a concertmaster, and she just returned from the All-State concert. Please help me welcome Dalton and Emily. Thank you, Dalton and Emily. We're now going to have about a 15-minute intermission, and you'll have an opportunity to make some additional connections in the evening. So welcome back in about 15 minutes. Thank you. I hate to break up these important connections, but I think we better get our second half started. So if everybody would take their seats. Thank you.
Yes, indeedy.
To get our second half started, please help me welcome back Bill Newton, David Pinsky.
Before we start, I think those folks, those high schoolers who played that wonderful classical music. Listen, we live in a world where we love meeting young musicians, and I hope maybe someday you'll take those wonderful strings and start playing the blues more often. You know? You can listen to Clarence Gatemouse Brown, who is just an absolutely wonderful blues fiddle player, and but you guys were absolutely great, and congratulations, and it sounded fantastic.
Amen. I'm glad we got an intermission between that and this. And, well, yeah, that reminded me of there was a Johnny Carson joke. He used to talk about the Burbank Philharmonica. It's a guy named Phil with a harmonica. Classical music of a sort, I suppose. Wrote this song with my grandparents in mind. My great-granddad had a steamboat on the Ohio River. He was a Civil War veteran. My grandmother was, if not born on the boat, quite near it. And even though we come from a land of rivers here, this actually had the Ohio River in mind when I wrote it. And I picked it because of the theme of connections, or lack thereof, or attempts to make same.
So one more thing. If you like what you hear from David and Phil, you can go to our website. Might as well do some promotion and go to davidandphil.info, and you could hear a bunch of stuff that we do, and maybe go out to a winery and have a nice glass of wine and listen to us for more than just 2 songs.
Where are we going to be Sunday?
We're going to be at Relic Winery outside of Jacksonville. We've been doing this a long time together. It is an absolute pleasure to be here. I hadn't seen Mark Yaconelli in 30 years. I used to coach his kids in Little League. So.
You used to coach everyone's kids.
Side by side, oh, from the sea out to the countryside. The river came first, and the road came tagging on behind. I'm gonna go wandering, pacify my mind. So long for me to know. Things got crowded and I had to go. Take the river road, leave those city streets. Oh yeah, the water in my eye and the dust on my feet. burn in the summer. And summer burn in the fall. That road get icy in the winter. But the river don't care at all. I'm going to follow that road till the day I die. Sleep by the river, watch the boats go floating by. I got a hat for the sun, my eye on the moon. Oh yeah, just wait a little longer, darling, and I'll come rather soon. The road is so long and the river is so wide, no matter how far you go, you can't reach the other side. Still I'm gonna follow, see where they might go. Oh yeah, that road too fast to rumble, that river too wide to roll. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next storyteller is Lisa Farlin, and Lisa and her family moved to Grants Pass from Sonoma County in 2018. She is passionate about helping others, particularly children, and spent 26 years working as a school psychologist. In 2010, wanting to write her mother's life story, she joined a writer's group, but what she discovered was her own story. She continues in that writing group today, and someday she just might finish that book about her mom. Please help me welcome Lisa as she tells about I Was Always an Outsider.
So I'm going to start with a little background story before the story. When Leslie first recruited me to speak at this event, the first thing as she's talking, the only thing that's going through my head was no frickin' way. But she was so pretty and she smiled so nice and she was so kind. And I thought, well, I'm just gonna smile back at her and take the information home and call her and we can tell her I can't do it. After 12 years of being in a writing group, I thought, you know, I've written a ton of stories about my life, but telling a story, one of those stories to a group of people that I don't know, that's just a whole nother thing. I don't consider myself a public speaker in any way. As a matter of fact, right now I'm imagining you all out there in your underwear. So I took her information home about the Hearth, and I Googled the Hearth, and I learned what it was all about. And I love the idea of strengthening and building communities through these kinds of events. But still, I thought, I just can't do it. I can't do it. But then the more and more I thought about it, I started to recognize there was this voice in my head. There was this voice in my head telling me, you can't, you shouldn't. You're going to make a fool out of yourself. Who do you think you are? You're not a writer, you're not published, let alone a storyteller. And I recognized that that was the voice of my critics speaking. And when I recognized that, I then remembered all the years I've been studying the work of Brené Brown. If you're not familiar with Brene Brown, she is a professor at the University of Houston's Graduate School of Social Work. She's a researcher, author, podcast host, public speaker, guru, and she's most widely known for her work on her research on shame, vulnerability, courage, and leadership. I'm seeing some head nods, so I know some people are familiar with her. You might have seen her on Oprah's Super Soul Sunday at some point or another. Brene has dedicated her career to studying human connection, which is our topic tonight, and how it works for all of us. And so she believes that human connection is why we're here. We're wired for it. It gives our lives purpose and meaning. And she was also widely known for her 2010 TEDx talk, where she talks about and shares her research on vulnerability. And that TED Talk was called The Power of Vulnerability. And so when I realized that my critic was preventing me from joining this group and doing this event, I made myself go back and watch that TED Talk for probably the umpteenth time in my life that I've seen it. And it was at that point that I realized I needed to do this. I've been practicing vulnerability in my life for 12 years, and I had been given this opportunity to do just exactly that. And so that's why I summoned up the courage to speak tonight. So in that 2010 TEDx talk, Brene talks about connection. She talks about her research with connection, and the funny thing that she found in her research, which surprised her, is when she asked people about connection in their life, they would tell her these heartbreaking stories of disconnection. And that really threw her off. And so after studying and collecting thousands and thousands of stories, she finally figured out what it was that causes us humans to have disconnection in our life, and she found out that it was shame. And she defined shame as the fear of disconnection. Shame says to us, is there something about you that if other people see or know, you might not be worthy of connection? And so I'm telling you all of this because that's a little bit about what my story is about, and you'll hear that in my story. Also telling you this because I can't speak a life story without telling you the profound impact that Brene Brown's work has had on me and my healing journey. Her work has moved me further along than any therapist I've ever seen. In fact, her book, this book here, it's called The Gifts of Imperfection. Let go of who you think you're supposed to be and embrace who you are. This book was like my Bible for a long time. I read from it daily, and I made note cards, and I posted note cards, quotes from the book, and I put them on my bathroom mirrors and all around my house while I was learning the concepts that she was talking about in the book. So that book has really launched me on my path to practicing vulnerability in my life and living what she calls a wholehearted life. So with that said, I'm going to tell you a little story about my childhood, and I'm going to practice what's called clean vulnerability. And that term was coined by Gabby Bernstein. She's another self-help personal development guru who's written a lot of books, has a podcast, those kinds of things. And Gabby Bernstein defines clean vulnerability as being able to share a story from your life and speak your truth and your genuine experiences without being triggered by them, knowing that you've come through the other side. Versus unclean vulnerability, and I'm sure you guys know exactly what I'm talking about when I tell you about unclean vulnerability, and that's the kind of vulnerability where when you just meet somebody and after the first minute, they're just spewing out every gory detail about their lives and giving you way too much information. That's unclean vulnerability. So I'm going to share my story, practice a little unclean vulnerability, and my story was written in January 2014, and it's called I Was Always an Outsider. She was a small town girl, the baby of 5. Her family lived in a rural area about 5 miles outside of the town of Santa Rosa, California. And that area was called Bennett Valley. Bennett Valley, if you haven't been there, I know Joanne, you probably know what I'm talking about, is a beautiful area of Sonoma County with rolling hills and open fields and oak trees with scrub jays flitting about and hawks soaring overhead. Now, 5 miles out of town by today's standards wouldn't be considered that far, but in the late 60s, early 70s, it was considered a journey to go to town. It was like a big deal to go to town. And that was especially so for her mother, who had just learned to drive at the age of 28, and driving always made her nervous. So thank goodness the school district had a bus and offered busing. The older kids went to the junior high and high school, and they either got to school with their friends, or they took the bus that came much earlier than hers. So by the age of about 7, she was pretty much left on her own to get down to the bus by herself. So she would climb onto the bus, and she would find her seat about halfway back, right in the middle on the right side, and scoot over to the window. And she would just stare out the window as the bus rambled along Grange Road and then Sonoma Mountain Road, occasionally stopping to take on more kids. And she talked to no one. She made eye contact with no one. And even when the kids would push back past her to get to the back of the bus, where the bus is really bouncy and they like to sit in the back of the bus, she just talked to no one. And the kids in the back were, laughing and chattering on incessantly, but she would just look out the window and observe everything she could. She looked at the leaves on the tree, the shapes of the trees, the garbage that was alongside the road, the houses, their colors, the cars that were parked out front. And then she thought about the people that lived in those houses. And then she thought about the kids who just came out of those houses and got on the bus. She wondered if their moms got up and made them breakfast. She wondered if their moms got up and made them a lunch. Sometimes her mom could stumble out of bed and slap together a peanut butter jelly sandwich, usually with so much jelly on it, it's squished out the sides and made a big mess in the baggie. But there was other times, despite several attempts, she couldn't get her mom up. First, she'd start with a whisper, "Mom," then a little louder each time, "Mom, Mom." Sometimes even shaking her couldn't get her mom to rouse. And it was on those mornings where she'd go down to the kitchen and make her own peanut butter and jelly sandwich. But the good thing was it would come out of the bag neatly because she'd put on just the right amount of jelly. She'd grab her sandwich and grab an apple and throw it into a small bag and head out into the dark to wait for the bus. It was always such a relief to hear the bus coming around the corner, because then she knew she wouldn't be alone in the dark any longer. And as the bus rambled and took its hour-long journey out Grange Road, out Sonoma Mountain Road, all the way out to Bennett Ridge and back, she would just look out the window, sit, listen, observe, and wonder. And her best friends didn't ride the bus. Their parents drove them. They didn't want their daughters waiting in the dark or the cold or the rain to take an hour-long drive to before school even started. So she'd have to wait until she got to school to see her friends. And then later on at lunch, when her friends took out their cute lunch boxes and their sandwiches with the edges, the crust cut off the edge of the bread, and their apple slices cut just so, she never once complained about her squished up peanut butter jelly sandwich. Instead, she just quietly eased it out of the bag without getting the mess all over her fingers and ate. And no one paid any attention, and no one knew. Of course, that little girl in that story was me. 50 plus years later, those girls are all still friends. I lived on Grange Road. My friends Robin and Pam lived on Sonoma Mountain Road, and my friend Kirsten lived way out in Bennett Ridge. Collectively, we call ourselves the BVGs, or the Bennett Valley Girls. This past weekend, if it hadn't been flooding in California so bad, we would have spent our 17th Martin Luther King weekend together. It was an annual trip that we started taking once our kids grew up and got older. This story is difficult for my friends to hear, because they truly did not know about my mother's addiction to Valium and alcohol when we were young. They prefer to remember her after she got clean and sober, and I get that because I prefer to remember her that way too. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Lisa. Our next storyteller is Karen Tate, and Karen is a thought leader, 7 times published author, speaker, podcaster, and social justice activist. Karen will soon release her newest book, Normalizing Abuse, a commentary on pervasive abuse in our culture. She is a caring economy conversation leader and power of partnership presenter. She has a certificate from the Smith College in the psychology of political activism, Women Change in the World, and can be seen in the award-winning docu-film Women Healing the World. Her website is karentate.net. Karen is going to tell her story about 2 days that changed our lives. Please help me welcome Karen.
Hi, everybody. Despite that introduction, I have to say, one of the reasons I volunteered to do this was to challenge myself, because I've never really done anything like this before. And I also wanted to do a barometer check of myself, and I think you'll understand what I mean by that when you hear my story. So I want to start with the first day that changed my life. And it started with a very random and chaotic connection. I was on my way home from work one day, and this young woman approached me. She looked like a college girl. You would never in a million years have thought anyone would have to be afraid of her. Well, she approached me very aggressively. I'd never seen her before. I had no idea why she was coming to me. She thought I had something of hers. She thought I had her phone. And she kept saying, I want my phone back, I want my phone back. And I said, I don't have your phone, I don't have your phone. And we went round and round like that for a little bit until she pulled out a stun gun. And I was paralyzed. I didn't know what to do. I had never been in a situation like this before. And all I could keep saying is, please, I don't have your phone. Well, that wasn't satisfying her, so she started to threaten me with the stun gun. And she would, go like this and threaten that she was gonna, hit me with it. And I tried to get away from her, and eventually I failed, and the stun gun touched my body. But as luck would have it, I didn't fall into spasms on the floor like you usually see people when they're hit with a stun gun. I felt like I was okay, and long story short, someone came in to my aid, and she went off about her business. Well, I thought I was okay. I mean, I didn't feel any physical after effects from the stun gun incident, and I didn't think too much of it right away. I didn't really take any action about it other than to call the police and make a report and all of that. So it wasn't long, though, before I realized that I no longer felt like I could go out in public and do my talks or do my podcasts or do my workshops. Suddenly, the world seemed to really shrink for me. And it was a long time before I realized that I might not have had a physical effect from the stun gun attack, but I did have psychological effects from that stun gun attack. And, I didn't want to be in my office with no back door. I didn't want to be alone in a room. I didn't want to be in a room with lots of people like this, full of strangers. I thought everything was going to end in a catastrophe. When I heard popcorn popping, it reminded me of the stun gun going off, and that created anxiety, and I'd wake up in the middle of the night with heart palpitations. Well, it was a while before I figured out what was going on with me and that I actually had post-traumatic stress from that attack. But, as fate would have it, life wasn't done with me yet. While I was struggling to figure that all out and work through that, my beloved husband, the wind beneath my wings, my soulmate, he was at work and he fell and hit his head. And he ended up having a brain injury. Well, talk about connections broken. He was disconnected from himself, and it was as if he didn't even know who he was anymore, and it was very difficult, as you might imagine. Well, that it didn't end there. We lost our jobs, we lost our income, we had to move away from the city and all of our friends and all of our connections. We ended up on a mountain, isolated, very isolated, and things didn't get better for a real long time. If you came by, you would probably see Roy and I sitting on the couch. We'd both be looking at TV like zombies, only Roy couldn't really follow the story that he was watching on TV. I realized I didn't care if I brushed my teeth or took a bath. I wore the same sweatpants and t-shirt for probably 3 years. I realized I actually didn't open my closet for 3 years. I imagined that when I heard the floorboards creak in our wooden house, that the house was going to collapse. I had dreams of our home with no walls or no ceiling, or someone was trying to push me into a black hole in a wall. This went on for quite a while, and it was very difficult for us, as you might imagine. But slowly, I found the local library. And I started reading and catching up on all of these series of books that I didn't have time to read prior to that. And that gave me an element of escape. It gave me a space to put between the crisis and myself. And soon after that, I engaged in journey work and talk therapy. And soon, I was able to breathe and to think. And life started to slowly get a little bit better. I started to see this isolated place that we lived in, not as this horrible struggle anymore, especially during COVID, because we realized that it really kept us safe. And when we were up on that mountain, I have to say, the only connection we really had was the UPS driver who brought us our non-perishables, and the local lady who ran the restaurant and was trying to keep her business alive during COVID. She would bring perishable food to shut-ins like us who weren't going out during COVID. Well, things gradually started to get a little bit better. Roy that's my husband, he was able to get into the Center for Neuro Skills, and he attended what they called Brain Boot Camp. And that was 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, all different sorts of therapies. And he got much better. I started to get my groove back, and I started thinking about this book that I published this January. I started really seeing a different perspective of the abuse and the exploitation that so many of us live in. And it was about recognizing that abuse and not taking it as just normal in the way things are, but really raising our awareness about how much of it permeates society in all different aspects of our life, and also how to get yourself out of that abuse, exploitation, and trauma. Well, things were starting to go rather well for us, and I guess I should say we decided to make a big step, and we moved off our mountain in isolation, and we moved here to Grants Pass about a year ago. And it's really been a good experience for us. We have met mostly friendly and warm people. We're trying to rebuild our lives and make new friends. And I guess I would just like to leave you with the thought that sometimes those cliches we hear, they really are true. At least they were for Roy and I. Sometimes it really is darkest before the dawn, and sometimes there really is an incredible gift in our suffering and in our loss. Because I have to say that I think that suffering and loss and the time that I spent in reflection for those 3 years isolated up on our mountain, I think it really did make me a better person. I think today I have more empathy and compassion and patience. So that's our story, the 2 days that changed our lives, the stun gun incident and my husband Roy's head injury. I'd just like to thank you for listening.
Thank you, Karen. Our last storyteller of the evening is Mark Yaconelli, and Mark is a writer, retreat leader, community builder, spiritual director, story catcher, husband, and father. He is the founder and executive director of the Hearth in Ashland. Mark is the author of 6 books, including Between the Listening and Telling, How Stories Can Save Us, and The Gift of Hard Things. Interviews and profiles of Mark's work have appeared in the Wall Street Journal, BBC News, ABC World News Tonight, and the Washington Post. Mark loves to cook for his family, putter in the garden, and read books out loud to his wife. Mark's story tonight is titled Madalena. Please help me welcome Mark Yaconelli.
My best friend moved to town when I was 13. He was 6'5", blonde, Tennessee accent. I met him on the basketball courts at Jackson Street Elementary School. I would go there most days in the summer to play, and he was a heck of a shot. He could do outside jumpers, but he could also control the boards, and the two of us, 13-year-olds, started teaming up, and we would play the high school guys, we would play grown men, and we would do pretty well, and we became friends. And when the school year started, that 8th grade year, on Friday nights, he would invite me to come and stay at his house, and I always went because I wanted to get out of my house. And we'd go into his room, and he had a Nerf basketball hoop, and we'd play Nerf basketball and play records. And usually, as the night got later, we would hear his dad out in the front room. And his dad would be talking louder, often to himself, sometimes yelling for us. And I could tell something was off. Later realized that his dad was drinking. And without recognizing it, my friend Kirk would point to the window, and we'd open it up, and we'd climb out, and we'd go out into the backyard where there was a group of Douglas fir trees, and we'd kind of hunker down there. And we would talk about basketball, and we'd talk about girls we were in love with, and we'd try to figure out the constellations of the stars up in the sky. But we didn't talk about his dad. And we didn't talk about my mom and the mental illness she was going through, or the divorce that was happening and the way our family was being torn apart. Girls, basketball, the stars. When I was 33 years old, I fell into a deep depression. All of the childhood wounds started to show up, you know. One of the ways we numb ourselves is work, and I had thrown myself into work. 60 hours, 70 hours, 80 hours a week, taking every traveling trip I could take, trying to build a career. But it was taking a toll on my wife, and I knew it, and it was taking a toll on my children, and pretty soon I just started to shut down, kind of numb. And one day the phone rang, and it was my friend Kirk. We'd stayed in touch. He was living on the East Coast. I was in San Francisco. He said, "Hey, I was talking to your wife the other night. She says you're not doing well." I said, "I'm fine." He said, I'm coming out. Take some days off work. I'm coming out, and he gave me the dates. This was in June. And so he flew in, rented a car, drove up to our house, and he says, let's go do something. Let's go somewhere. I said, you know, I don't know why you came. I got a lot of work. I don't really have time. He said, Kirk says, I'm going to stop you there. I talked to your wife. You have time. Let's do something. I said, I don't know what I want to do. I was shut down, disconnected, didn't know what I wanted, didn't know what I felt. Next morning, we woke up, and Kirk said, let's go back home. Let's go up to Siskiyou County. We grew up in Wairika, just on the other side of the mountains here. And so we drove north around noon. I wasn't talking. He was asking questions. I wasn't answering. And we got up to Williams. He pulled off. He says, I know where to get some amazing tacos. I said, whatever. We pulled off to this place. He asked for habaneros. Get habaneros on the tacos for my friend. Brings them over. He says, this will alight your endorphins. This is good for you. And so I ate these I was tears coming out of my eyes eating these tacos with habanero sauce. And he goes, here, drink this. And he brought over some Coronas. And we drank beer and sat at a little picnic table, just kind of out at this trailer where these tacos were being made. And he said, you look tired. I said, I am. He said, well, lay down. It's a hot day. It's a beautiful day. And I slept for 3 hours outside this little taco trailer, just in the grass there. And when I woke up, he said, okay, let's drive. And we drove up past Redding. And I said, where are we staying? He said, I'll figure it out. We take a left at Redding. We go up into the mountains, and I'm smelling the trees from my childhood, and the loam and the pine. And it's night, and we see this little cabin. It says Carl's Fishing Cabins. Just a little light bulbs kind of screwed in on a sign. Kirk says, let's try this place. I said, is there anything else? Said, no, we're going to try this place. He goes in, knocks on the door. Carl comes out, rents us a cabin. Kirk says, is there anything to eat here? He says, I got some chips and an orange. Kirk says, we'll take it. So he brings me a little bag of chips. He brings us a bag of chips, little thing, and an orange, and we go in the cabin, and Kirk says, let's go out in the backyard. And I'm not talking. I'm just shut down. And we sit in the backyard, and Kirk's a high school English teacher. And he says, are you going to talk with me? And I said, I don't really have anything to say. I don't even know what's going on. He says, okay, you asked for it. I'm going to read poetry. And he takes out Walt Whitman. And he's reading all these grief passages, a whole long poem about the funeral procession for Abraham Lincoln. And he reads, you dark gray bird, sing your song of woe, your warbly, reedy song of grief. He's reading these lines to me, and I'm looking up at the stars. And it gets late, and we go in, and we go to sleep. And the next morning, I wake up, and Kirk Scott said, you're not going to believe this. Carl is going to rent us 2 inflatable kayaks for $40. Okay. We go outside, we get on the river, we paddle, and we're on the salmon. And eventually, halfway through the day, we haven't eaten anything. We don't have any suntan lotion. We're getting sunburnt. It's a hot, late June day. There's a big eddy, slow part of the river where it's wide, and it just kind of spins. And I pull my kayak there and lay on my back, and I'm just kind of dozing. And he does too. We kind of sit there for an hour, letting our boats just swirl. And then we continue on, and Kirk stays silent, and I stay silent, and we get down, and there's Carl with his truck, and we pull the kayaks out, and now we're starving into the day. And I say something. I'm hungry. And he says, you're hungry? Okay. He says, isn't there a place, an Italian woman, up in the Siskiyous who makes amazing food? And sure enough, I remembered. I said, yeah, my sister used to work for her. Her name's Maddalena. She's from the island of Sardinia. She's Italian. She had a Michelin star restaurant in San Francisco. I knew this story. fell in love with a stockbroker guy who had a fishing cabin in Dunsmuir, California. They married. 3 years later, they divorced. She left her restaurant and took the fishing house up in Dunsmuir. And she bought, if you've ever been through town there, she bought the train depot. And she turned it into a restaurant. And she would serve dinner just 2 nights a week, May through September. Closed the rest of the year, closed all week. Just Friday night, Saturday night, May through September. This was June. So we got in the car. Kirk says, call him. This is before smartphones. So I text my sister. She texts me back. Here's the number. We call. They say we got 1 table at 9 p.m. Kirk says, tell him we'll take it. We drive back into Reading. We drive up into Dunsmuir. We show up. This place, this is like a marigold colored, the train station there with kind of oxblood trim. And there's a garden next to it, a kitchen garden with all these herbs and green lettuces. And you can smell the food, and I'm starving. We're walking around this place like a couple of hyenas waiting to get in. And eventually they call our name. And we come in and we sit at the table. Kirk says, look at the menu. I said, just you order for me. He says, okay. Waiter comes over. He says, give us the best bottle of wine you got in the place. Comes in, he opens the thing up. And then the food starts to come out. And the very first thing, I'll never forget, it was these little half moons of avocado. And inside the avocado was mozzarella that Madalena makes herself, heirloom tomatoes, basil, vintage balsamic vinegar, virgin olive oil. We took a bite of this thing, and it just melted. And I looked up, and both of us had tears in our eyes. It was so amazing, the flavors, the textures. And we started laughing with tears kind of coming down our face. It was so good. We were so hungry, so dehydrated. It's been out in the world so long. We started to cry and laugh eating these little avocados. And then on came this endive, these beautiful lettuce shards with shavings of Parmesan. And we ate that, and we got quiet. And then came out green beans with these kind of smoky walnuts that had been pan-fried. And we're quiet. We're not talking. We're just eating. But once in a while, we look at each other, and we're laughing. And then I'm crying. And out comes bread from the oven, and she's made these little bruschettas. And now Kirk's just ordering little things at a time, and they're bringing them out, right? The Sicilian olives that are warmed in a pan. And then the main course comes out, and it's this halibut that has been covered in fennel seeds and then grilled. And it comes out, and this halibut comes out, and we eat it. And I can't stop the emotion. There's so much love in this food, and it tastes so good. And my friend's looking at me, and he's smiling. He said, yes, more wine. We want more wine. Now, Madalena in this restaurant, she commands the whole place if you've been there. You walk in the front door, she's right there cooking. And she looks like Sophia Loren. She has black hair, fierce big brown eyes, red lips, and she's fierce in this kitchen. She's cooking in the middle of the restaurant. She can see all the tables, and the counters are about this high, about shoulder height, and she's cooking behind there. And when she plates food, she sets it on the counter, and then she smacks the counter, and she calls the number of the table. And the wait staff, wherever they are, if they're in the middle of talking to you, cease all communication, turn and run, and grab that plate so it goes straight from the pan right to you, right? And she's monitoring the whole room while she's making the food. And my friend and I are eating this food, and we're watching her. And of course, men are coming up to talk to her because she's so beautiful. And she ignores them. She stays with her work. But we're eating this food, and I'm feeling my heart break open. And my friend is laughing, and he turns and yells, Madalena, you've healed my friend. And I said, it's true. It's true. I'm feeling healed. And I get up on the chair, probably because I'd had too much wine. And I said, Madalena, I don't know what you've done to me. We're coming home with you tonight. And she says, sit down. So we sit down. But Kirk is now standing, and he's reciting Shakespearean sonnets to Madalena. And she's cooking, but she's listening, I notice. She's cooking, she's listening. And we're calling these things out to her, and there's only about 3 other tables filled in the place. We order dessert. It's a gelato. That's a lemon basil gelato comes out with these little pastries that she kind of has, and we're eating this stuff. We're like, oh, this is amazing. Now it's about 11 o'clock at night. Everyone's gone. The waiter comes and he says, hey, we're closing. You guys are the last ones here. Here's your check. Thank you for being here tonight. And I say, no, we're not leaving. And my friend Kirk says, he's right. There's no way we're leaving. My friend has come back, and we're still hungry, and we're not leaving. This guy's about 20 years old. He doesn't know what to do. He turns and he goes back into the kitchen. He says, Madalena wants to know what you want. And my friend says, we want the whole meal all over again, whatever the price. She comes around from the back where the kitchen is, from the counter, and she looks at us. And she says, okay. They lock the door. They put the close sign on. She sends everyone home except for the one waiter who's working with us. He clears the table. He puts a new tablecloth, a new candle, new napkins, new settings, new bottle of wine. And she serves us the whole meal again. And when the night ends, we stand up, and she comes over, and she kisses us each on the forehead. And we're laughing. We can't believe this. We go outside. We walk to the little Super 8 motel, and we sleep the sleep of full-hearted men.
Thank you, Mark. We're now going to close the evening with some more music, and please help me welcome back Dalton Burchette. Thank you, Dalton. You know, tonight we've heard from our storytellers and our musicians, and I hope you leave this building tonight with a little bit more understanding about the importance of connections. You know, we heard about the importance of family connections and sometimes how they're different over time, how a daughter matters, the power of words such as "you matter," the little girl in the school bus that we may not really know, how small events or big events change our lives, and how the healing power of friends can change our lives. So tonight, I hope you will, when you go home tonight and tomorrow, you'll write that letter, you'll make that phone call, you'll see that friend. You know, if you like these "You Matter" cards, I get 10,000 of them printed at a time. Please stop by and see me at the dealership, and I'll be happy to give you some. I really truly believe that those two words matter. It's always interesting when I give that to somebody. First things they always do is I'll give my business card and they always turn it over to see what's on the other side, but there's only two words. I think we can also do that for others, but I think it also makes a big difference in ourselves, in the healing power of ourselves, making those connections. So our next Hearth, it's at the program, is July 16th, which is correct. However, there's also going to be April 20th is the date to put in your calendars. So April 20th is going to be the end is still going. And you can also put July 16th, because that also is going to be one. So whether you attended in person, attended online, thank you very much for coming. Have a safe trip home.